All right, so The Rise of Skywalker is out tonight, officially in the United States. I've already seen it. I'm seeing it again in a couple hours, and I really like the movie. At first, I felt kind of overwhelmed by the feeling of it. And then I got to geek out with some friends talking about it who had seen it. And then yesterday, in this really odd conversation with my father, who is a Star Wars fan but couldn't go with me to see the movie, he went and spoiled it for himself. So when we were driving home from the airport, we could talk about it. And I got to geek out with him over the cool things in the movie that he didn't see because he had just read what somebody else interpreted from some leaked bulletin points. And at the end of that conversation, he was excited to see the movie, and I was more excited to see it again because, yeah, it's a fun movie. It's the end of the Skywalker saga. It's satisfying. There's a lot of fan service, a lot of nostalgia, and that's not a bad thing. Well, unless your name is Rian Johnson, who at this particular point might feel that way because this movie does take a few key shots at his movie and it nukes it from orbit. I mean, it's hysterical. But he says here that appeasing Star Wars fans is a mistake. Star Wars The Last Jedi director Rian Johnson, who's no stranger to divisive feedback, explains the perils of pandering to the fandom. Well, it's really funny about that too. And I just did a whole video about the fandom menace and being appealed to and them still hating it because you can never really be happy when you come at it from an absolute pure negative stance, right? You start feeding into that beast, it's never going to go away. And you can watch that. It's going to be on the channel. Anyway. So, but Rian Johnson here has angered a lot of people as a result of everything. And he's clearly not happy with the way things have gone, and so now he's speaking out about it, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. So it says here that Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker finally realizes George Lucas's mythical, long-held plan for a 9-film saga that once felt like a pipe dream, although it was technically 12 films originally. Yet while that film has sequel trilogy launching Helmer JJ Abrams closing things out, the embattled director's chair occupant of 2017 middle act of Star Wars: The Last Jedi has provided seemingly revelatory comments regarding the divisive twists he took with the film. Keep in mind, he hasn't said anything in 2 years really about that. He hasn't. He's been skewered across the internet time and time and time again, rightfully so in my opinion. And he took a few shots back at fans. He called them man babies. He called them sexists and whatever, which a lot of the people didn't quite care for. And I get that entirely. But now he's saying it all of a sudden right before the release of this new movie that does take shots at him. And he wasn't even at the premiere. So look, when we talk about the Rian Johnson trilogy, it's pretty dead. Anyway, it goes on to say here, in a recent appearance on radio.com podcast, Swing and Mrs. Johnson, who recently achieved acclaim for, Swing and Mrs. There we go. Johnson, who recently achieved acclaim for November's Whodunit, Knives Out, still stands by a Star Wars cinematic offering, which has been famously assailed for the direction in which it steered key characters. Johnson explains that the motivation for his arguably radical turns were due to his desire to subvert expectations and not slavishly cater to an unappeasing imaginary concept of consensus. It's not slavishly cater to these people. It's continuing the plot threads that were pre-established in the last movie. And then when one of your main actors, the one who was going to kind of headline the last film, dies unexpectedly a full year before the release of your movie, and yet for some reason you and the powers that be at Lucasfilm go full steam ahead with how you want to end that movie, which makes very little sense to me. What we have is a situation where, yeah, people are going to be critical of that. It's not slavishly catering to unappeasing imagery. Our imaginary concept of consensus. This really has a lot to do with just like bad storytelling, well directed, bad storytelling. Anyway, so he goes on to say here, I think that the creative process with satisfying the fandom would be a mistake that would lead to probably the exact opposite result. Further explaining, even my experience as a fan, if I'm coming into something, even if it's something that I think I want, even if I see exactly what I think I want on the screen, it's like, oh, okay, it might make me smile. It might make me feel neutral about the thing. And I won't really think about it afterwards, but that's not really going to satisfy me. Well, but what people thought about with your movie wasn't a good thing. The conversations that came out of The Last Jedi were negative. The conversations that came out of The Force Awakens were definitely not 100% positive, but there was that air of, oh, I wonder what's going to be happening next. I really wonder where that mystery box is going to take us, because we know JJ Abrams famously loves the mystery box for better or for worse. And there are some elements of The Rise of Skywalker with the mystery box that I do kind of feel was for the worse, but still didn't detract from my overall viewing experience. That being said, when Rian Johnson starts coming out and saying like you don't need to placate what came before it, that doesn't work when you're the middle part of a trilogy. When you are the middle part of a 3-act structure, you kind of have to play into it, right? There's a great saying that says, when you make a sequel, you are now in the business of fan service. Rian Johnson had never made a sequel before. He had done Brick, a wholly original concept. He did The Brothers Bloom, a wholly original concept. He did Looper, a wholly original, if not completely pointless concept. And he then did this movie. I mean, Knives Out is doing well because it's kind of an original concept. Yes, it's a take on the old Agatha Christie whodunit and whatnot, and people seem to like the way that he approached it. I hear it's a very good movie. I still actually want to see it because I do think he's a good director, if not a poor storyteller, but he can rely on more spectacle on that front than trying to be the middle act of the sequel trilogy or the third trilogy in a 42-year saga. So by referencing what came before it, you kind of have to at that point. You can still make it your own. Think of it like you're doing a television show, right? And you've got the different guest directors. Well, in the case of Rian Johnson, he came into season 5 of Breaking Bad and directed some of its best episodes. Ozymandias was a great episode, and a few other ones I forget the names right now, especially the one where Hank dies, which might be Ozymandias. It's been a long time, but those are some great episodes. And when he did that, I was like, man, I was really excited to see what he was going to be bringing to Star Wars because those episodes were very well done. But what I didn't think of at the time is that he had Vince Gilligan basically kind of reining him in, holding him by the collar. He didn't write the episodes. He didn't produce the episodes. He just came in to direct it. And he's got a very good visual eye, and he did a very good job directing it. And that's the kind of thing that I think if he was going to come over to The Mandalorian, I would be on board with that, as long as Favreau and Filoni were basically there with him going, okay, Ryan, like, give us what you got. But remember, you can't subvert expectations too much here. You know what I mean? There's still someone who is pulling the strings, guiding him and allowing him to do his thing, but still keeping the beginning, the middle, and the end and the key points intact, and letting him play with certain areas that are deemed inconsequential. Like arguably the middle film in a trilogy is not really deemed inconsequential. It's what should be there, right? It's like the meat of the story. If you were to look at, let's say, the Skip Woods Save the Cat beat sheet that most Hollywood movies use as a key reference for how they write scripts, which that's a whole other video in and of that particular subject matter. But he would call the middle act the meat and potatoes of the story, or like the fun and games part of the story is what he calls it. So when he calls it the fun and games part, that's kind of where we saw the whole Canto Bight sequence and a lot of the other aspects in The Last Jedi that just didn't really seem to make a lot of sense. It wasn't really fun and games. These things weren't really moving the plot forward, but they were just there because he wanted to subvert expectations. That's the unfortunate thing with The Last Jedi, is subverting expectations is not what you do for the middle act of a movie, right? And all the defenders of The Last Jedi trying to claim that it's very similar to Empire Strikes Back on that front are still very wrong. And they're just doing what they can to defend Johnson. And that has a lot to do with the fact that he's been pretty embedded with the film critics in Los Angeles for many years. He's very friendly with them. And this is one of those things where they're like, you mess with my boy, you mess with me, and everything else. Johnson isn't wrong when it comes to subverting expectations on original content, though, which is one of the reasons why I do want to see Knives Out. I want to see his take on something original. He did subvert expectations with Looper, but he subverted them in a way that made it a one-time watch for me and not one that I'd ever want to go back to. Brick, on the other hand, was one that I feel is worth many watches because the dialogue is so interesting that you really have to go back and listen to it to kind of get your hands on it, right? To kind of figure it all out. I do think he's a talented filmmaker, not the best narrative storyteller. And that's why it didn't work for The Last Jedi. But to come out and say that, like, oh, you shouldn't appease fans makes no sense. Once you start getting into like a 42-year saga, you want to have callbacks, right? I mean, one of my favorite things with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, even though it had its problems story-wise, were definitely a lot of the older callbacks to the earlier films, like how Harrison Ford was taking on and mimicking Sean Connery from Last Crusade a number of times when he was with Mutt. I just happened to like that whole thing was like father and son. And then looking at Mutt and his actions kind of mimicked a younger Indiana Jones, like Raiders of the Lost Ark Indiana Jones. And that was kind of one of the things where we got to see that juxtaposition of character growth. And I thought that was fun. The monkeys still sucked. The plot was still kind of but the movie overall was fun when it got to those character moments. The Last Jedi didn't have any of that. It didn't have any of that at all. The best thing The Last Jedi gave us was building up the relationship between Kylo and Rey, and I liked that. I actually did like that quite a bit. That's something that I enjoyed. And that was something that was very much carried over into The Rise of Skywalker, to where I think it had a satisfying conclusion. That was the buildup, and that was probably one of the key things I would give credit to The Last Jedi on. And that was still, working off of probably what JJ had already established, even if he diminished Finn's entire role, turned Poe into a mutineer for no real reason, and also gave us the Holdo maneuver, which was one of the stupidest things I've ever seen. It's cool to look at, but it's still stupid nonetheless, right? Kind of like, again, the monkeys in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where it's like kind of cool to look at, but really stupid when you start thinking about the logistics of the situation. The last thing you want to do in a fantasy movie is start having your audience questioning the science of how something operates, right? Suspension of disbelief is key. Johnson failed that when he failed to follow the beat points set before him by JJ Abrams, to the point of where JJ had to come back and literally cram 2 movies into one in order to try to make up for what we missed out on 2 years ago. But anyway, look, I just wanted to give my thoughts and my opinions on that. You are free to agree or disagree with me. Either way, I want to hear what you have to say. Your thoughts, your opinions below in the comments. Write them down, good, bad. I want to hear it. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a fantastic day. May the Force be with you. Go see Rise of Skywalker. We're going to do a spoiler discussion this weekend. Have yourself a great day, and peace out. Hey, thank you very much for watching the video. If you want to keep the conversation going, and if you made it this far, you clearly do, come on in and join the Discord. Link is in the video description. Can't wait to see you there. Have yourself a great day, and peace out.